A day of reflection marking 5 years since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. Events have been held across the UK remembering the more than 200,000 people who've died. Hello there. Events have been taking place across the UK, marking 5 years since the start of the COVID pandemic. More than 200,000 people here have died since 2020, with more than 7 million deaths worldwide. Hundreds of thousands of people are still suffering the effects of long COVID, leading to a big rise in the numbers of people claiming sickness benefit. Here's Simon Jones.
A procession of the bereaved. Families walk the length of the National COVID Memorial Wall in London. There's reflection, there's sadness, and there's anger at the way the pandemic was handled.
We lost both my mother in November 2020 and my brother 19 days later in December 2020 to COVID. It was an indescribably painful time. It feels like an open wound. There's grief, a different grief that is always with us, that we carry.
My mother died within 5 days. She was buried in a bag because the undertakers weren't allowed to touch her. She was just left in a bag and put in a coffin.
There are more than 200,000 hearts on this memorial wall alongside the River Thames, representing more than 200,000 people who have died in the UK, with COVID-19 listed as one of the causes on their death certificate. The pandemic saw lockdowns, deserted streets, medical staff pushed to their limits. Surveys by the Office for National Statistics suggest people's experiences of poor health and loneliness have not improved over the past 5 years.
As a nation, we are traumatised, and the effects of such are still apparent today.
I changed who I was to put you by.
In Glasgow, music for reflection. At the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, the vital role played by medical staff who were on the front line in the battle against the virus is marked. In London, flowers to say farewell to loved ones, but the effects of COVID continue to be felt. Recent research suggested long COVID symptoms were adversely affecting day-to-day activities of 1.5 million people. The health think tank The King's Fund says the pandemic has left a legacy.
We were hit harder than many countries around the world. And our waiting times, the waiting list is really only just peaking now. So we've got 7.6 million on the waiting list. So we're still recovering from it. It's a long haul and it's worse than many other countries around the world.
One key reflection from people here: lessons must be learned. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Good evening. Emotional scenes played out across the nation today, marking the 5th anniversary since the COVID outbreak, the virus that gripped the globe and changed our world forever. Today was a national day of reflection, remembering the 230,000 people who died with the virus and the acts of kindness and care it inspired. Lone Piper led relatives who'd lost loved ones along the National COVID Memorial Wall in London. Further commemorations took place at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire and around the country. Charlotte Cross reports now on a day of remembrance.
As Big Ben struck 12, this part of the capital fell silent, pausing to reflect on the 5th anniversary of an event which has left a lasting legacy of grief. Stacey lost her mother to COVID in January 2021.
I feel like my family were robbed of such a special woman in our lives. Losing my mum is like losing one of my arms or one of my limbs.
Today, hundreds of families like Stacey's came together, led on a poignant walk past the National COVID Memorial Wall in London for a special commemoration, marking 5 years since the pandemic first struck.
Stay at home, protect our NHS and save lives.
The moment which changed the entire country, from work and school to shopping and leisure for more than a year. As within hospital wards and care homes, the death toll climbed. Felicia Kwaku was a nurse on the front line and she lost her uncle. She's now a member of the UK Commission on Covid Commemoration.
The speed and the high numbers of people that were dying was really terrible. In order to grieve, to reconcile, we need to remember our dead, the love that we carried and cared for them, and we need to hold that place in history.
And across the country, people have spent today doing just that. From a procession and wreath laying in Glasgow to a tree planting in Northallerton in Yorkshire to the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire, where a poem was read by former Children's Laureate Michael Rosen, who himself spent 48 days in intensive care. On the River Thames, the fire service paid a special tribute in front of the watching families, who threw flowers into the water.
For Peter. Dad.
Peter Owen died in April 2020. His family couldn't even have a proper funeral.
From seeing him fit and healthy before lockdown to suddenly having a box of ashes, yeah, so that was really difficult, just not being able to be with each other, and I think that's why things like this is really important.
We remember him all the time, every day I think of him, but this really brings us together with other people who have been through the same thing.
There are now calls to make this memorial wall a permanent fixture. Charlotte Cross, ITV News.